Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, we continue our commemorative session, and unfortunately, Julia Budka, professor from the München Ludwig Maximilian University, cannot attend to this session, but she was so kind that she sent a video presentation, and we can see this. I try to.
Good morning to all of you. First, let me really express my deep regret that I'm not able to be with you here in Budapest today, but I'm nevertheless honored, and it's really important for me to contribute to this László Török Memorial Day, and I would like to pay a tribute to his pioneering studies about the cemetery of El Kuru in Sudan. We can start with a quote by László's seminal book from 2009, and I quote, "Interpreting El Kuru, the archaeologist attempts to write history." So El Kuru is really of crucial importance for Sudan archaeology. More than 30 years ago, László published several articles that highlight this importance of Kuru, and I just chose two of them here. So he was really kind of investigating the so-called origin of the Napatan state, and especially chronological aspects of the El Kuru cemetery. It was especially the debate about the short versus the long chronology that kept László and others busy. So there was a very interesting exchange between especially Tim Kendall and László. And I will not go into details today, but some aspects of this chronological debate are still unsolved today, and they are really of high relevance for our field. Today, I will just focus on more or less the starting point, and this is the early phase of the royal cemetery at Kuru, where the rulers were not using pyramids already, but still tumuli. And in some of these tombs, and I have circled them in red, the original excavator of El Kuru, George Reisner, found broken pottery. Red broken pottery with what he called Egyptianizing decoration. It's especially Kuru tumulus 2 and 6, and this has started a very diverse discussion about a possible Egyptian impact and about the origin of the Napatan rulers which used the cemeteries. And this is also related to this debate in dating the long chronology versus the short chronology. On this slide, I have illustrated some of this broken decorated funerary pottery from El Kuru. It's mostly redware with white line and also with black painted decoration, and it really shows an Egyptian style, if you want. It shows some offering people, some people obviously executing some kind of ritual, and then also those mummified figures. This slide gives you another overview of the pottery from Kuru, where we also have some incised marks and also Egyptian inscriptions, which is really interesting, like this very typical Anch, Chet, and Vase symbols, typical hieroglyphs, especially in the funerary sphere. But then we also have two fragments which are likely to show a title. So I would read it Hemnetzer Tepi Shu, so the high priest of Shu, which is really interesting. And here we might even have a name, and I will come back to those two pieces soon. They really seem to be New Kingdom-ish, so Egyptian New Kingdom, so very early in date for Kuru. On the other hand, we have other pottery that is clearly of post-New Kingdom date in Kuru. We have decorated and undecorated wares. We have both imported and local wares. And I would also like to highlight this interesting decorated bowl, which is really unique from my perspective and seems to be something really local for Kuru. Coming back to this broken pottery, the red broken pottery that was found by Reisner in the tumuli tombs, they were interpreted very differently. So first, they were very soon associated with Egyptian funerary customs and with a possible influence of Amun priests that kind of really shaped the El Kuru dynasty. Then the shift in research was towards the indigenous tradition, so that everything was local, everything was Nubian, Kushite. And then, and this is especially where László stepped in, it was kind of interpreted as a Kushite tradition, but with awareness of Egyptian rites. And since this Egyptian ritual was always kind of referred to, I just very briefly want to mention this famous Egyptian ritual, the breaking of the red vessels, that is already attested in text since the pyramid text, so since the Old Kingdom in Egypt. We do have some pictorial evidence like the one I show you here on the slide. And in general, we have a diverse evidence for this ritual. There's a huge discrepancy between the texts and the archaeology. There are several problems of interpretations. So it is really difficult if you find broken red pots in Egypt and you interpret it as the breaking of the red pots. Yeah. There was a lot of research about this, especially by Anne Seiler in 2005. And what we definitely know, it is kind of really related to the funeral. It's a kind of a rite of passage ritual. And it is really relevant in the Egyptian culture, but it has various individual compositions, let's put it this way. And you really need to have firm evidence to be able to really say this is the specific ritual that is also mentioned in the pyramid texts. Yeah, and this is why more than 10 years ago, I was very strict when I reassessed the El Kuru broken pots that it has nothing to do with the breaking of the red pots in Egypt, because we do not have any clear confirmation for this. So I won't go into detail here, but this is just showing you an overview of the most relevant interpretations for those pot-breaking ceremonies at the cemetery of El Kuru. And you see that László contributed very early on. He was also proposing the Szech Cseszerút ritual. For once, he was very much in line with Tim Kendall here. But he also kind of said that, especially a little bit later, that a Kushite tradition, a local tradition, is also very likely. And especially in 2009, László voted for, I quote, a mixed Kushite Egyptian character of the mortuary cult. And this is something I would like to discuss today after all those years that have passed since then. And in general, I was already in 2014 more or less in line with László that I also think it's an innovative adaptation to the Kushite funerary practice with possible Egyptian influence, with the knowledge of some Egyptian stuff, because what I focused on are parallels that were previously unknown from Egypt, from Abydos. So my own take on the El Kuro material was really coming from Egypt, working at Abydos on the ceramics from Abydos, ceramics that are closely related to the tomb of Osiris in El Ga'ab, so to a huge funerary and cultic assemblage. And what we found there is a lot of evidence for apotopaic rituals, a lot of breaking, a lot of red vessels, including red vessels with decorations and red vessels with texts. And the striking thing is the red vessels with texts and decoration would really fit very well to Laszlo's long chronology at El Kuro. So this is why he was also very pleased when back in the 2010s I presented this material, this new parallel between Abydos and Kuro. And it is definitely really intriguing and interesting to discuss. But today I want just to show some of those examples. So we heard that in Kuro we mostly have white and black paint on the red vessels, and the same holds true for El Ga'ab, Abydos in Egypt. So we do have offering scenes, we do have texts, we have royal cartouches, we have sometimes white, mostly black. And thanks to the text analysis by Andreas Effland, we can date these pottery vessels quite nicely to the Libyan period, so more or less to the 9th century BCE. What is also really important is that in Abydos we do have Ramesside, so New Kingdom vessels with hieroglyphic incised inscriptions. And they give the names of the high priests, of the priests. And this is something that is still kind of puzzling me, how we can explain those two shirts at Kuro. I was unable to relocate the actual shirts, but they really seem to me very, very similar to those Ramesside vessels. And this is, of course, something that opens up another huge bunch of open and really relevant questions. In El Ga'ab at Abydos, we also do have a large number of real Kushite, like 25th dynasty vessels, a huge amount of votive vessels, a huge amount of broken vessels, and especially of vessels with killing holes, as you can see on the photo here. And then we also have several ones with red splashes, with irregular red paint, where maybe in a kind of a funerary ritual, the pots were kind of sprinkled with red paint. And this was then probably, this is our interpretation, interpreted to be a kind of an apotopaic ritual. So the red color is for sure very, very significant. And with this kind of short reminder of what the actual pottery tells us about El Kuro and its possible links to Egypt, I would like to come now to Laszlo's idea of the mix, the Kushite local take of something that is a mix, and in more recent years the concept of cultural entanglement has been applied to Sudan archaeology and also to the Napatan period. And I just want to mention a very recent article by the late Roberto Gozzoli. He called it Cultural Entanglement and Royal Texts in the Kingdom of Kush. And he, among others, refers to the famous victory stela of Pije or Pianchi. And he concludes that even if this object was most likely shaped in Thebes, it was, I quote, integrated with the local reality and situation at Jebel Barkal in Kush. And this is something where a lot of the early phenomena in the early Napatan phase actually very nicely fit into this really entangled sphere. Based on this cultural entanglement advancement, I would also like to raise the question whether it is possible to revisit the El Kuro evidence in light of what I proposed recently with my team as a context-based biography. We proposed this for the New Kingdom, so for the late Bronze Age, and one of the recent articles is mentioned here on the screen. What I mean with context-based biography is that we combine the context-based approach with a landscape biography approach, and really want to address complex social spaces which are intertwined with the landscape, with the specific region, with specific non-human factors, with geopolitical things, etc. And for the Bronze Age in Nubia, we can very nicely show with a number of examples that objects and motions actively shape a new set of material culture in the colonial period of the New Kingdom. And this material culture has then a distinctive local character. And really thinking about, especially this bowl, but also this shirt, I really think this also applies to Kuro, where we do have something distinctive local. Yes, we have parallels elsewhere, especially at Arbeidos, but it's not exactly the same. It's not a copy, but it's a local variation. I would really argue that El Kuro embodies a local interpretation of both Egyptian and Kushite cultures. And this is very logical if we consider that during the late Bronze Age, during the New Kingdom, Nubia was a part of the colonial Egyptian empire. So Egyptian culture was present, and in El Kuro, we obviously see something new arising, something very local, with parallels elsewhere, but not real copies, with local adaptations, and with definitely a new design that is very, very specifically Kushite. To put this into the broader context, we can also build again on Laszlo's work. So what I show you here is the opening page of his chapter in the 2009 book on what was previously always viewed as a so-called Dark Age, as Nubia in the Third Intermediate Period after the New Kingdom. So it was previously really always associated with a collapse, with a lack of sources, with a dark age. And already László in 2009 mentioned that there is kind of a continuation of what we see during the New Kingdom. I kind of made this very, very short to make it fit into this talk, but his general assessment in 2009 was that what we see at Kuro and elsewhere is the result of a gradual process. So there was no abrupt collapse, and there was no direct Egyptianization out of nowhere, but it was really kind of a logic sequence of events, a gradual process in his words. And this applies to Kuro, but it would also apply to what we can see, for example, at Semna with the famous relief and inscription of Queen Katimala. Thanks to archaeological work, since the 2000s, we have now new material, new data that really allow us to say, yes, there was indeed a continuation of lifeways after the fall of the New Kingdom, after the empire. And we have a number of evidence that suggests local agency and local takes of both Egyptian and local Nubian culture. The most important case studies were already known to László. He could also kind of refer to very early works at Amara West, at Tombos. These are highlighted on the map. But since then, a number of ceramic studies were published, a number studies based on bioarchaeology were published. And we do have, since the 2010s, this new theoretical advances like the cultural entanglement approach, which were really applied, especially by Stuart Tyson-Smith and Michel Bousseau, on this period after the New Kingdom at Tombos. Yeah, and furthermore, we also have now new data from another region in the Middle Nile, and this is especially the region between Attab and Ferka, which is the Moors concession area, the Munich University Attab to Ferka survey project, where we started to work in 2018. So this is located in the neighborhood of Amara West, in the neighborhood of Sai Island, and it really allows us to address social and economic changes in the period from 1200 BCE onwards. We have now the means to talk about the rural hinterland in relation to the urban centers such as Sai and Amara. And in the last years, we have conducted a joint analysis of archaeological finds, material culture, textual evidence, historical data, etc. And they really show that we have some intriguing patterns of transformation and maybe also something that we can call resilience in the late New Kingdom and in the subsequent epoch. And this seems to be highly relevant for the what we can call origin of the Napatan state. Yeah, in a very recent article, which was just published a few days ago, I have presented an analysis of local dynamics, shifting powers that all indicate that maybe very similar to what we have in Kerma times in Nubia, we also have something like a pastoral state in the pre-Napatan and Napatan times in this part of the Middle Nile. Yeah, I would have really loved to discuss all of this with Laszlo. And yeah, now it's fitting to at least mention it in this tribute to him here. In the last part of my talk, I would like to go back to Kuro. And I would also, following this landscape biography approach, like to talk a little bit about the sacred landscape of Abydos, Thebes, Kuro, and Nuri. So we will talk briefly about pyramids, briefly about tombs, Shaktis, and Osiris. So the first aspect is that we should remember that the pyramids that we find in the New Kingdom, for example, at Tombos, that they also are not only the missing link to the Kushite royal pyramids later at Jebel Barkal, Meroe, etc., but that we also have mud brick pyramids in Thebes, in Abydos, and in Sudan. If we go back to Kuro again, and if we look at the tomb that is most likely a pyramid of Pir, Kuro 17, where unfortunately the superstructure was not preserved, but you can see this deep staircase, the dromos. It is really interesting to stress that we find a very, very close parallel for this tomb for an Egyptian local king of Thebes, Hasiyeze, dated to the 9th century BCE, being buried in Medinet Habu in Thebes, and recent work has suggested that also above this tomb there was a mud brick pyramid. So at least really something to think about. What is of course very well known is Nuri and the famous pyramid of Taharqa, which is definitely, in terms of the subterranean rooms, referring to the famous Osirion at Abydos. Michela Shivchogini was the first one who noted this already back in the 1960s. And here I also really want to stress again that the Osirion was not only influential in Abydos, but it was also kind of copied in the temple tombs in Assasif, so in Thebes again, especially in the tomb of Montemhart, the famous Montemhart, who was the most significant political figure in the times of the 25th dynasty and the early 26th dynasty in Thebes. And he was also leaving some inscriptions in Abydos. So Montemhart knew the Osirion himself, and he kind of deliberately wanted part of the Osirion in his temple tomb in Assasif. And yeah, all very, very interesting connections of similar architecture in different landscapes. Especially remarkable are also niches, shrine niches that we find at Nuri. I hope you can see it here in the ground plan of the tomb of Taharqa, but also here in Nuri 8, on the wall, you see this small niche and a kind of a chapel, a shrine around it. And intriguingly, in the last years, parallels for those niches were found in monumental scale in the courtyard of one of the Kushite monumental temple tombs in South Assasif, in the tomb of Karach Amun TT 223. Another thing I want to mention are the Shaptis. We have deposits of Shaptis along the walls in Nuri especially. We have this huge number of Shaptis for Osiris Taharqa in Nuri, more than 1,000. And especially in the case of Aspelta, what you see here on the screen, they appear also together with niches. So the question is really, could these shrines that we see on the walls maybe also be somehow related with the Shaptis, with the Stundenwache, with the awakening ritual for Osiris? And here again, you have those monumental niches in the Kushite temple tomb in Thebes. A common theme, both in Egypt and in Kush, is definitely the protection and the guardianship, the guarding of the god. And the coffin and the tomb itself are turned into shrines for the god. We have protective deities appearing on the side walls of coffins and tomb chambers. And Brigitta Balander, for example, suggested that the huge number of Shaptis in the Kushite tombs may also have had a two-dimensional precursor of the so-called Shapti rooms in New Kingdom of royal tombs, like you see here, the Shapti rooms. And I would now like to stress again how similar the representations of those figures on the Kuru shirts are actually to the depictions in the Shapti rooms. So this is all really, really fascinating. The high level of protection has one main aim, and this is the reawakening of the god Osiris. And unsurprisingly, the first appearance of the pictorial depiction of this ritual derives from the Osirion in Abydos. So you can see this here. This is the first depiction. And then we have the famous presentation in the tomb of Queen Kalhata in Kuru. We have it in the Kushite tomb of the high official Ramose in South Assasif. And we have the same motif in 25th dynasty shrine coffins that were found in various places in Thebes. I started with pottery. I would like, of course, to finish with pottery. So I stressed already some years ago that not only this red broken pottery finds parallels between Kuru and Abydos, but that we also have the famous Ga'ab vessels, millions of small votive vessels that were deposited for Osiris in Abydos, in Ga'ab, that they also find parallels in Nuri. And until very recently, this was really the only parallel for those Ga'abs. And some years ago, I questioned can this be a coincidence? It must really relate to the cult of Osiris, to the Abydian rituals. However, in recent years, it becomes really obvious that the appearance in Kushite funerary context is not coincidental at all. So what we found in recent years in the South Assisiv necropolis are a number of attestations of Ga'ab vessels in Thebes. So we do have Kushite temple tombs and Kushite other tombs in South Assisiv where we do find the same Ga'abs like we find at El Ga'ab itself in Abydos, and very similar Ga'abs to what we find in the tombs in Nuri. And also the ritual setting, the ritual practices that can be associated with these vessels are very similar to what we find at Abydos and what we find in Thebes in South Assisiv. Yeah, and with this I would like to conclude. I would completely agree with Stuart Tyson-Smith, and you can see here the quote I'm referring to. I agree that it's not a question of Egyptian influence or of indigenous tradition when we look at what we find in Kuro and also later in Nuri, but it is really rather a very, very complex Kushite ethnogenesis. And Stuart Tyson-Smith put it like you see on the screen. So he also refers to the pyramids, but he really refers to survivals of an old imperial culture that were consciously adapted. So we do have a combination of a lasting legacy and direct contact with contemporary Egypt. And I would say this is actually more or less what László also observed a few years earlier than Stuart. So it ties in very, very nicely. Yeah, so in conclusion, this tribute to László must acknowledge his fundamental research on key aspects of Napatan culture and Kushite culture. And it should also acknowledge his courage to hypothesize and to stimulate discussions in our field. During this talk, this is logic in science, it should have become obvious, and I tried to demonstrate that terminologies, concepts, they are dynamic, they are evolving. But László was already many, many years ago proposing ideas very, very similar to what we now frame in new words and in new concepts. But the actual concept, I would say, are very, very similar. Furthermore, we now, after 30 years, have the advantage that we have new archaeological data we can build on. But all in all, I really hope László would be pleased that history is still being written at Kuro, but also in other places in Sudan. And with this, I would like to thank you very much, and I wish you a very productive day, and many, many greetings to all. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor Julia Budka, and thank you again that you sent your video presentation for us. And you can see probably, I hope, on the YouTube site of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences later. Unfortunately, Gábor Zolyomi is ill. We just received the message from him, and our next speaker will be Daniel Kahn, and I would like to extend my warm welcome to Daniel Kahn from the University of Haifa and thank him for undertaking the long journey to Budapest. And I now invite him to deliver his lecture, Some Thoughts about the Assyrian Withdrawal from Egypt.
So good morning, everybody. I would like to thank the organizers of the conference who invited me to come here. It is really a great honor to be invited to lecture in a memorial for László, who is a great scholar and very, very dear friend. I would say almost a father figure, at least for me. I met László for the first time in 1998 when I was working on my PhD. I was trying to contact him a year earlier when I started my PhD because I was going into Nubian studies from Egyptology, and our libraries in Israel did not have anything about Nubia and Nubian texts. And when I was looking for material about Nubia, this name popped up everywhere. There was this guy, a Hungarian guy, which name was a bit difficult to pronounce. And he published here, and he published there, and he published there. And I really had to get hold of his work to start researching seriously. So I looked up where I could find him, and I got the telephone of the Department of Egyptology in Budapest. And I phoned the secretary there, and I asked if I could get in touch with László. But unfortunately, she did either not understand me or I don't know what, or he was not there because he's somewhere else writing his books. So I could not get in touch with him in 1997. The next year was the conference in Boston, which was my first conference in Nubian studies. And I got there, and there was this man with white hair, as you can see here. And I went up to him, and I introduced myself in a cocktail party. And I told him that I tried to reach out to him to get his books, to study what he has written. And he, the next day, nonchalantly gave me 2 books. And since then, I'm collecting his books. So I have half a shelf of László Török's books. Since then, that's already almost 20 years. It's more than 20 years. Oh my God, time flies. So more than 20 years that we've been in very close contact, eating breakfast together, lunch together, dinner together, arguing like Angelica so aptly described, that we can not agree about anything, but have wonderful time together. And I remember one time that we went up the British Museum from the cellar, going up after the lectures, and there was this scholar from Canada who was giving a lecture about the legitimacy in Kush. And he had another idea which not Angelica, not me, and not László had. And he was worried that we would crucify him or argue with him or something like that. And we went up the stairs and we said, you know, we are all disagreeing, but I think this is the only place in Akadémia that we won't eat each other or kill each other, but when we finish here, we go and drink something together. And that is the spirit of László. So today, I will examine one of the most significant transitions in ancient Near Eastern history, the end of the Assyrian control over Egypt in the mid-7th century BCE. This isn't just a story about one empire losing territory. It's a case study in how internal weakness creates opportunities for subject peoples and how careful source criticism can overturn long-held scholarly assumptions. For generations, scholars have maintained what seemed like a reasonable narrative. After Ashurbanipal, king of Assyria, conquered Egypt in 664 BCE, defeating the Kushite pharaoh Tutankhamun and sacking Thebes, the Assyrians simply left. There is no evidence of Assyrian hegemony over Egypt after Ashurbanipal's conquest of Egypt in 664 BCE in the Assyrian royal inscriptions. According to this view, they concluded a peace treaty with their newly appointed vassal, Psamathichus I, and voluntarily withdrew at the height of their power, handing control over the entire Nile Valley to a local ruler who had just ascended the throne. But let's pause and think about this critically. The Assyrians had spent a decade fighting to subdue Egypt. Esarhaddon, who ruled the Assyrian Empire between 681 to 669 BCE, launched multiple campaigns, including a failed invasion in 673 BCE that was completely omitted from his own inscriptions, but recorded in the Babylonian Chronicle. When he finally succeeded in 671 to conquer Egypt, he died just 2 years later trying to return to Egypt to suppress yet another rebellion. His son, Ashurbanipal, who ruled between 668 and about 630 BCE, had to campaign twice more, in 667, sorry for all those dates and numbers, and 664 BCE, to finally expel the Kushite rulers Taharqa and his successor Tutankhamun. During this entire period, Assyrian forces were continuously fighting against Egypt. Would any empire invest this much blood, effort, money, and royal prestige into conquering what they called the most precious jewel in the crown, only to immediately hand it over to a local vassal and walk away? The traditional narrative asks us to believe exactly that, and it has never quite made sense. To understand what actually happened, we need to carefully examine the career of Psamathichus I of the 26th dynasty. When Ashurbanipal installed him as ruler of Sais in the Western Delta in 664, he was just one of many local dynasts, rulers and tribal chiefs controlling small portions of Egypt. He wasn't even the most powerful. He controlled only the Western Delta and possibly parts of the Central Delta. The rest of Egypt remained fragmented under various local rulers, much as it has been for decades. Our earliest monuments from his reign date to his 8th regnal year, 657 BCE. By this point, he controlled the entire delta. But controlling the delta while the Kushites still held Upper Egypt hardly constitutes ruling a unified, independent Egypt. The key date comes from 656 BCE, his 9th regnal year, when the adoption stela records that his daughter Nitocris was installed as God's wife of Amun in Thebes. This ceremony marked the peaceful unification of Upper and Lower Egypt under Psamathichus' authority. Did this unification mean Egypt was independent, or did it occur while Egypt remained under Assyrian suzerainty? The evidence strongly, well, not strongly, but suggests the latter. Oh, I'm missing one slide, so sorry. Consider Papyrus Amherst 63, an Aramaic text written in Demotic script. Among its contents is an elaborate pro-Ashurbanipal propaganda piece about the fraternal war between Ashurbanipal and his brother Shamash Shuma-Ukin, the king of Babylon. This civil war lasted from 652 to 648 BCE. Now, why would Assyrian propaganda be circulating in Egypt during these years if the Assyrians had peacefully departed over a decade earlier? The presence of such material suggests continued Assyrian influence, if not outright control. Something's missing. So this is a second. Second, we have the mysterious reference in Manetho's king list to a ruler named Set, who supposedly reigned for 31 or 34 years. Scholars have traditionally dismissed this as a textual corruption or scribal error. But what if Zet represents a garbled reference to Asiatic, Setetiu, or Assyrian rule? The time frame would almost fit from the beginning of Assyrian control in 671 BCE to approximately 643 BCE. Here's Papyrus Amherst. So this is Papyrus Amherst. This is the 23rd dynasty. Now we have this. Third, we have Psamathichos' first stela from the Ashur Road, dated to his 11th triennial year, 654 BCE. This damaged inscription describes military operations against Libyan tribes, and it mentions recruiting various military forces. Among these forces is a group designated with unusual hieroglyphic classifiers that don't match the typical writing for the Libyan Meshwesh tribe. So on the right you see one of the instances where Meshwesh is written. In other texts there is an abbreviation like this. And if we look at the text here, we can see that it is written totally different here with men and women. And basically, whoever reads Egyptian hieroglyphs sees the difference. And there are people here who teach that if you don't know it, right? So a careful analysis of the signs suggests this might actually refer to Asiatic Amu forces, possibly Assyrian or their allies, serving in Psamathichos' army. If correct, this would indicate that even Psamathichos was consolidating his control over Egypt. He was doing so with Assyrian military support, not in opposition to Assyrian interests. The key to understanding Egypt's liberation lies in events happening far to the northeast in Mesopotamia. In 652 BC, Ashurbanipal's brother, Shamash Shuma-Ukin, whom Ashurbanipal had installed as king of Babylon, launched a major rebellion. This wasn't just a family squabble. It triggered a cascade of revolts across the Assyrian Empire. In Ashurbanipal's inscription describing this crisis, he lists the enemies arrayed against him at the four cardinal directions: Gutium, actually in the north, Amuru in the west, and critically for our purposes, Melucha, meaning Kush, in the south. Not Egypt, but Kush. Think about what this tells us. If Assyria had already lost Egypt 2 decades earlier, why would they care about Kush, which would be separated from Assyrian territory by over 1,000 kilometers? The fact that Ashurbanipal identified Kush as the threatening power in the south only makes sense if Assyria still controlled Egypt and therefore still bordered Kushite territory. This single reference, often overlooked by scholars, provides crucial evidence that Assyrian control over Egypt persisted into the early 650s BCE. We can see the empire fragmenting in other ways too. In the Levant, Kedarite Arabs were raiding throughout Amuru, the west, by 652-651. Administrative tablets from Gezer in Israel show that in 651, local officials didn't know the name of the new Assyrian eponym, the official whose name dated the year, until months after the year began. This breakdown in communication reveals an empire under severe stress. One of the most fascinating aspects of this story is how we can watch Assyrian royal propaganda evolve in response to changing circumstances. Ashurbanipal's scribes produced multiple versions of his royal inscriptions over the years. And by comparing these different editions, we can see them struggling to handle an increasingly embarrassing situation. In early versions of Ashurbanipal's inscriptions, composed when relations with Egypt were good, the scribes tell a detailed story about how Egyptian rulers rebelled after Ashurbanipal's first campaign in 667 BCE. Necho of Sais and Memphis, that's the father of Psamatich I, was captured and brought to Nineveh, but Ashurbanipal, in his wisdom and mercy, forgave him, reinstated him as ruler of Sais, and appointed Necho's son as ruler in Atribis, demonstrating royal clemency by converting rebels into loyal vassals. But then something interesting happened. In versions composed during Babylonian Civil War, that is prisms B and D, dated to 649 and 48 BCE, that's the end of the war, this entire episode disappears. Now, the scribes mention only that rebellion broke out in several cities, and that one rebel leader was captured and punished. All mention of Necho's capture, forgiveness, and glorious reinstatement are gone. Why? Because by this time, Necho's son Psamatich had successfully rebelled and established Egyptian independence. How could Assyrian propaganda continue to celebrate the king's wise clemency toward Necho when Necho's own son was now defying Assyrian authority? The earlier mercy that had seemed so wise now looked foolish. The scribes responded by simply erasing the embarrassing details from the official records. Only after the civil war ended did later versions return to the original story, except for one version, Prism F, from around 645 BCE, which omitted Ashurbanipal's entire first Egyptian campaign. Even then, the scribes were still trying to manage the narrative. The most explicit evidence for when and how Egypt achieved independence comes from the strangest source, the story of Gyges, king of Lydia in western Anatolia. According to Ashurbanipal's inscriptions, Gyges initially sought Assyrian friendship. He sent messengers after seeing Ashurbanipal's royal name in a dream. Standard ancient diplomatic protocol wrapped in supernatural legitimation. When Ashurbanipal acknowledged him, Gyges successfully fought off the Cimmerian tribes threatening his kingdom and sent Cimmerian prisoners to Ashurbanipal as tribute. But then, in Prism A, dated to around 643 BCE, we get the remarkable passage, quote, Gyges sent his troops to the aid of Psametichus, king of Egypt, who threw off the yoke of my rule. Let me emphasize how important this is. This is an Assyrian royal inscription explicitly stating that Psamathichos rebelled, he threw off the yoke, and that he did so with foreign military assistance from Lydia. This completely contradicts the scholarly consensus of peaceful Assyrian withdrawal through diplomatic agreement. The inscription continues with Ashurbanipal cursing Gyges and wishing for his death at the hand of his enemies, a wish that was soon fulfilled when the Cimmerians' hordes overran Lydia around 644 BCE, so it was a wish with full intent. The Assyrian scribes presented Gyges' death as divine retribution for his betrayal, proof that the gods punished those who opposed Assyria. Now, scholars had traditionally dated Gyges' death to around 652 BCE, which would place his aid to Psamathichos before the unification of Egypt in 656. But Spalinger demonstrated that Gyges actually died in 644. This means the Lydian military assistance to Psamathichos occurred during or immediately after the Assyrian civil war of 652 to 648 BCE. The chronology becomes clear during the civil war in Mesopotamia, when Assyria was desperately fighting to survive. Psamathichos saw his opportunity. With military support from Lydia and possibly other foreign powers, he rebelled and successfully expelled Assyrian forces from Egypt. By the time Prism A was composed around 643 BCE, Egypt's independence was an accomplished fact that even Assyria propaganda couldn't entirely obscure, though they tried to present it as temporary rebellion that would be punished. So now we have biblical echoes of the transition. Before concluding, I want to briefly mention another piece of evidence that's even more controversial. The biblical book of Isaiah, chapter 11, verses 11 to 16, contains a prophecy about God gathering the dispersed remnant of his people from various lands, including Assyria, Egypt, Patros, that is the southern land in Egyptian, Cush, Elam, Shinar, which is Babylon, Hamat, northern Syria, Hama, and from the islands of the sea. The dating of this passage is notoriously difficult. Scholars have proposed dates ranging across 5 centuries. That's a biblical scholarship. If you want to, precise, how do you say, studies, this is, it's not mathematics. But if we analyze the historical and geographical context carefully, it fits remarkably well with the period around 655 to 645. So that is what we have here. The prophecy speaks of God drying up the tongue of the Egyptian sea. And so this might be the tongue of the Egyptian sea. And dividing the river into 7 streams. One has to know that in biblical scholarship, the river with the don't have the word now, is mostly identified or always identified with the Euphrates. There's only one river, the river. But here, this river doesn't fit. This river is almost certainly the Nile, which has 7 tributaries in the delta, rather than the Euphrates. The passage envisions an exodus from Egypt, not from Assyria, of Judeans from Judah, who are described as the remnants who remained from Assyria. This is a unique historical situation. Judeans in Egypt who are somehow connected to Assyrian power at the moment when that Assyrian power is ending. It makes perfect sense if we understand that Assyria controlled Egypt until the mid-640s or the beginning of the 640s, and that the withdrawal of Assyrian forces from Egypt represented a major geopolitical shift that resonated throughout the region. So this is the seven-headed monster, which is equated with the seven-headed river that is Canaanite myth. You can see it also in other places, like in Ur, even in Mesopotamia. So let me conclude by explaining why this revised chronology matters beyond mere scholarly precision. First, it fundamentally changes our understanding of Assyrian imperial decline. The loss of Egypt wasn't a calculated strategic decision, it was an imperial defeat caused by eternal weakness. The Assyrian civil war created a window of opportunity that subject peoples throughout the empire exploited. This pattern, internal crisis leading to peripheral revolts, is consistent throughout Assyrian history and helps us to understand how empires fall. Second, it affects our understanding of the site renaissance in Egypt. For decades, Egyptologists have marveled at how quickly Psammetichos I unified Egypt and established the powerful 26th dynasty. But if he did so while still nominally under Assyrian sovereignty, and if he required foreign military assistance to achieve full independence, then his achievement looks somewhat different. He was a skilled political operator who knew when to cooperate with imperial power and when to rebel, but he didn't accomplish this alone or peacefully. Third, this case study demonstrates the importance of careful source criticism, and I'm aware that the sources that I'm using are very difficult to use. Ancient royal inscriptions are not objective historical records. They are propaganda documents that actively shape narratives to serve political purposes. The evolution of Ashurbanipal's inscriptions shows us scribes making editorial decisions in real time, omitting embarrassing details, revising earlier claims, and trying to put the best face on deteriorating situations. Only by comparing multiple versions, integrating evidence from different types of sources, from different times and different places, and reading carefully for what's not said, can we approach historical truth or at least a good story. Finally, this reminds us that silence in ancient sources often speaks volumes. Egyptian contemporary sources don't describe the Assyrian conquest and withdrawal because Egyptian cultural norms prevent recording defeat. Assyrian sources try to minimize the embarrassment of losing Egypt by obscuring the circumstances of withdrawal. The fragmentary evidence from places like Elephantine and references in biblical text. Elephantine is where probably the Papyrus Amherst was found, but not totally sure that it was there. Take a new significance when we realize they're preserving memories of a major transition that official sources try to obscure. The Assyrian withdrawal from Egypt wasn't a peaceful handover at the height of imperial power. It was a military defeat during moments of crisis. And I will say thank you that you gave me the opportunity. Thanks for Laszlo for a wonderful friendship. And that's all here. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for your beautiful lecture and the beautiful words about Laszlo Török. And I would like for you to present the commemorative certificate. This is you with the silver-like medal of the 200th anniversary of the Hungarian Academy of Sciences. Please.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we have a little time before the lunch, and I would like to invite Ádám Szabó from the afternoon session to hold the lecture. I know exactly the title of your presentation. Oh, you can see.
So, thank you. Köszönöm szépen. Tisztelettel köszöntöm a jelenlévőket. Our guests respectfully, because this anniversary is one anniversary of the Hungarian Academy of Science, which was founded to protect and develop the Hungarian language. I will have my presentation in Hungarian, but you have also the text, and thank you for your time. Tisztelettel köszöntöm még egyszer a jelenlévőket. Egy reneszánsz figuráról szeretnék beszélni, aki Pannóniában tevékenykedett a Krisztus születése után II. Században, és hát több irányban fejtette ki a tevékenységét. Tulajdonképpen rendes római államférfi volt, és ha úgy tetszik, akkor nem csak az igazgatás történetben, nem csak a hadvezetésben alkotott nagyot, hanem bár nem maradt fönn semmiféle iromány tőle, de mégis őt tekinthetjük az Epiktétosz és Marcus Aurelius közti filozófiai átkötő elemnek a sztoicizmust illetően. Tudni illik, Marcus Aureliusnak az egyik mesteréről van szó, akiről nagyon szépen és szinte meghatóan írt. Az a szerencséje volt Pannóniának, hogy 12 esztendőt töltött ez a rendkívüli ember itt, ezen a területen, Pannonia Superiorban, legio legatusként, utána egy különleges megbízatással, mint jogász, aki ilyen közigazgatási természetű dolgokkal foglalkozott, utána Pannonia Inferior helytartója volt, majd rövid szünet után, vagy hát egy bizonyos szünet után visszatért Pannonia Superiorba, és van még az életének egy különleges része, az életének a végére esik, ugye feltűnik Apuleiusnak a mágiáról szóló könyvében is. Tehát mindenképpen egy kivételes emberről van szó, akiről Marcus Aurelius is megemlékezik, a Historia Augusta is megemlékezik, és nem utolsó sorban Apuleius perében is feltűnik. Jelesül ő volt a bíró, aki felmentette Apuleiust, úgyhogy nem lehetünk elég hálásak neki. Hogyan olvasnánk Apuleiust, ha ő nem mentette volna fel 158-ban, Szabratában, ugye? No, a II. Században valamit. Ja? Technika. Tehát látszik valami? A tér, amiről itt szó van, alapvetően ugye a pannóniai tevékenységét részletezném, hát ez a II. Századi Pannóniának a Ptolemaios által összeállított térképe, némi vetülettorzulással a maiakhoz képest, de váljon Ptolemaiosnak a javára, hogy egészen Luigi Fernando Marsiliig rendes vetülettel nem rendelkezett az egész terület, úgyhogy a ptolemaioszi vetületekért is hálásak lehetünk, és hát itt van az időrendje Claudius Maximus életének, hogy a császárokkal szemléltetjük, ugye Domitianus korában született, egy kicsit élt Nerva alatt is, Trajanus korában kezdte el a karrierjét, Hadrianus alatt ívelt, Antoninus Pius alatt tetőzött, és Marcus Aurelius alatt tulajdonképpen már nem tevékenykedett, mint látni fogjuk. Erre azért kell külön kitérni, mert Néhány szerző azt írja, hogy Marcus Aurelius emelte őt magas tisztségekbe. Ha megnézzük az életrajzi adatait, amit pont egy aquincumi felirat által világosan föl tudunk vázolni, illetve Apuleius mágiáról szóló műve által, akkor látjuk, hogy az ő pályafutása Trajanus uralkodásának vége felé indult, Hadrianus alatt végig benne volt a nagypolitikában, illetve hát a római igazgatás történetben Antoninus Pius alatt szintén, de Antoninus Pius uralkodásának a végén az ő élete is véget ért. Tehát Marcus Aurelius, mint császár, nem tudta őt semmilyen módon magas tisztségekbe emelni, lévén, hogy Antoninus Pius után lépett trónra. Ugyanakkor kijelenthetjük, hogy hatalmas befolyással és hatással bírt Marcus Aurelius uralkodására is, Claudius Maximus holtában is, a 12 éves pannóniai tapasztalatait átadta tanítványának, legnevezetesebb tanítványának, Marcus Aureliusnak, aki ezeket kitűnően föl tudta használni. Cirtai származású volt, vagy kirtai görögösen, azaz észak-afrikai, és szenátori rendű családba született, a rávonatkozó adatok alapján 95-ben Krisztus születése után, és a rávonatkozó adatok egészen a legutóbbi időkig nem találtak egymásra. Hogyha megnézzük itt a Prosopographia Imperii Romaninak az összeállítását, akkor látjuk, hogy tulajdonképpen a 744-től 746-ig ugyanarról a szeméről, bocsánat, a 744-745 alatt, meg a 46 alatt is ugyanarról a szeméről van szó, de az adatokat nem lehetett összekapcsolni. Az adatok összekapcsolását, ami részben felirattani adatokat jelent, részben auktorforrásokat, azt végül is többen végezték el, köztük Alföldi Géza természetesen, Sir Ronald Syme, Werner Eck, Fitz Jenő és Lőrinc Barnabással bezárólag. A prénomenje egész a legutóbbi időkig nem volt ismert. A dia bal alsó oldalán látható felirat az 1972-ben került elő Almásfüzitőn, de csak 2010-ben tette közzé Lőrinc Barnabás és Kovács Péter, és akkor innen tudjuk, hogy Gaius Claudius Maximusnak hívják. Tehát tulajdonképpen az élet története, vagy hát az adatai még most is szaporodnak. Mit írt róla Marcus Aurelius legismertebb tanítványa? Ugye elsősorban az erkölcsi nagyságát emelte ki Claudius Maximusnak, hogy önuralmat tanult tőle, hogy a dolgoknak az elfogadását, tehát tulajdonképpen leírja, hogy a sztoicizmus alapvető tanait Claudius Maximustól sajátította el, és végül kijelentette, megállapította, hogy boldog volt, hogy ismerhette Maximust, ugye az Apolloniusszal, meg Rustickusszal együtt, tehát ezek az ő mesterei voltak már, mint a Marcus Aurelius mesterei, és végül a 8. könyvében az elmélkedéseinek megemlékezett Claudius Maximus haláláról is, illetve hát a feleségének, Secundának a haláláról is. Nagyon érdekes, hogy ebből az adatsorból tudjuk megállapítani azt, hogy nagyjából mikor halt meg Claudius Maximus, jelesül valamiféle rendszer vehető észre ott az élet mulandóságáról szóló eszmefuttatásában Marcus Aureliusnak, hogy a 160-as években 160-ban elhunytakat sorolja egy sorban, utána egy fél generációt visszaugrik, és akkor azokat sorolja, Hadrianust és kortársait, és tulajdonképpen a 160 körül elhalálozottak közé tartozik, mind Claudius Maximus, mind az őt gyorsan követő Secunda a felesége. És miután a forrásokban többet nem tűnik fel 160 után, ezért tételezhetjük fel, hogy valóban 160 után már nem élt, és Marcus Aurelius kétszer is megemlékezett arról, hogy tulajdonképpen súlyos beteg volt, ezt azért tartotta fontosnak megemlíteni, mert az önuralom, illetve az úgymond sorscsapás dacára is aktívan, hatékonyan működő embernek az egyik iskola példája volt számára Claudius Maximus. És akkor látjuk, hogy Apuleiusnak az önvédő beszédében is előfordul Claudius Maximus. Itt természetesen nem lehet minden példát felsorolni, hiszen az egész beszédet neki mondta. Mert időnként megszólítja a beszédben, a végén meg méltatja a nagyságát. Székesfehérváron került elő egy felirat, amit Aquincumból vittek el, bár a szőnyiek szeretnék, hogy a szőnyből vitték volna el, de nem, mégiscsak Aquincumból vitték el, és az aquincumi katonavárosnak a vezető rétege, tehát a katonavárosi Ordo Decurionum, ugye a Canabé-nek a nevében állította ezt a szoborbázis feliratot, vagy inkább posztamens felirat, Alföldi Géza szerint lovas szobor posztamens felirata volt. Ez azért rendkívüli, mert bármilyen hihetetlen, egy ilyen gazdag, feliratban gazdag településről, mint Aquincum, nem ismerünk helytartó szobrot ezen felirattal, de magát a szobrot se ismerjük, a feliratot pedig ezt az egyet. Tehát olyan rendkívüli figura volt Claudius Maximus, hogy Aquincum szoborral tisztelte meg, és hát a pályafutását is felsorolta, innen ismerjük egészen a 140-es évekig, hogy ő mi mindennel foglalkozott, ezt alább majd mindjárt részletezem. Tehát önmagában ez a jelenség. 3 évente jött egy új helytartó, és óriási feliratos anyag van, és nincs helytartóra vonatkozó kivételő. Nagyon büszkék lehetünk rá. A tartománynak a területét, Pannóniának a területét láthatjuk a következő dián, és Aelius Cézárt. Ugyanis Claudius Maximus a Legio Scuticában volt Trajanus alatt tribunus, majd a katonai pályafutását egy évtized múlva folytatta, és a Legio Prima Adjutrix parancsnokaként tért vissza Komárom Ószőny területére, ugye Brigécióba, és erről az időszakról viszonylag keveset tudunk, viszont a legió parancsnokságát követően, néhány tisztség betöltése után visszakerült Pannóniába 137-ben. Ez rendkívül fontos számunkra, ez a 137-es dátum, mert Aelius Cézár, azaz a trónörökös kíséretében látjuk viszont, Aelius Cézárt prokonzuli hatalommal, tehát a legnagyobb polgári császár alatti hatalommal felruházta Hadrianus, polgári és katonai ügyek rendezésére, hogy a Historia Augusta írja. És a Historia Augusta szerzője még azt is jónak látta kihangsúlyozni, hogy hát a trónörökös azt elsősorban a testi tulajdonságai tették alkalmassá a trónra, és nem az észbeli képességei. És hát ott volt mellette Claudius Maximus, mint juridicus propretore utrius que Pannonie, mindkét Pannonia prétori rangú juridikusa. Ennek a fordítása jogtudósként nem lenne pontos, tehát jogi ügyekkel, igazgatási természetű ügyekkel foglalkozó méltóság volt a trónörökös mellett, és tulajdonképpen nagyon sokat a források nem írnak arról, hogy ők 237-ben mit tettek, mit nem tettek, úgyhogy sokat gondolkozott a kutatás azon, hogy volt valami háború, hogy idejött Aelius Cézár, vagy végül arra jutottak, hogy hát Antinous kultusza, az teljesen biztos, hogy ő vezette be 2 karnotumi felirat alapján. Minden esetre, ahogy az életrajzíró írja, ezeket a dolgokat benevel Potius, tehát jól és megelégedésre látta el Aelius Cézár Pannóniában. Ez alatt én inkább mögötte a Claudius Maximus látom, és itt látjuk ezeket a dupondiusokat, amiket Aelius Cézár a sikeres pannóniai küldetésének örömére veretett, ezzel adta hírül a birodalomnak, hogy a kiküldetés sikeres volt. 137 év végén ő visszautazott Rómába, ahol szilveszter éjszakáján el is halálozott. Nem ő volt az egyetlen egy a római császárok közül, aki pont szilveszterkor halálozott el, ugye Commodus is akkor, ez egy veszedelmes időpont volt rájuk nézve, úgy tűnik. Az újabb kutatások alapján a következő tetteket a Benevel Potius közé lehet nevesíteni itt Pannóniát illetően. Most ezt ne vegyék 100%-osan centire visszakereshető határnak, csak úgy nagyjából. A municipalizációjáról van szó Pannóniának, arról a municipalizációról, amit a kutatás 124-re tett, ugye, hogy akkor most Hadrianus meglátogatta Pannóniát, és minden várost megalapított, amit csak ismerünk. Először a kutatás kimutatta, hogy Hadrianus 124-ben nem járt Pannóniában, viszont hát azért az ő uralkodása alatt felgyorsult Pannónia municipalizálódása, viszont a feliratos források alapján azt lehet valószínűsíteni, hogy az egykori törzsi területek, például itt az észak-pannóniai területen az azaluszoknak a civitásza a 137-ig állt fenn. Ezt onnan tudjuk, hogy a Nigruszt, aki Sziusznak volt a fia, ez egy rendes azalusz katona, ő az utolsó, aki katonai diplomát kapott olyan origóval, származási hellyel, ahol azt jelölték meg, hogy őt a Civitas Azaliorumból sorozták be. Utána már ilyen nincsen. Utána mindenkit vagy Magetiánából soroznak a területről, vagy pedig Mogionibusból, ahogy feliratos alapon legutóbb ki lehetett mutatni ennek a településnek a nevét. Ha már vannak településeink, ugye municipiumok, akkor azoknak territóriuma is volt. Természetesen meghatározzuk a régiónak a központját, ez a brigéciói legiótábor és a hozzátartozó regió, szó szerint regió, így hívjuk a legióhoz tartozó területet. Egy picit, hogyha szabadabban akarunk fogalmazni, akkor a Práta, de hivatalosan regió. Van is Centurio Regionariusum brigécióból, és akkor ahhoz meg Pannonia Inferior és Superior, illetve Aquincum határához tudjuk viszonyítani a berendezkedését a tartománynak összevetve a feliratokkal. Summa summarum, annélkül, hogy különösképpen itt most belevesznék a részletekbe, a 137-es évre 3 municipium alapítása tehető, ebből az egyik Mogionibus, ugye a Mogiones törzs területén alapított település, ez a mai Környe, Komárom-Esztergom megyében, Mogetiáné, Somlóvásárhely, Veszprém megyébe, és nagy valószínűséggel Murszella ismert maradt felirat, 2 is, mind a 2 Pannonhalmán van, töredékesen, illetve elveszett, mindegy, de hitelesen tudjuk, hogy létezett, hogy Murszella forumát Aelius Cézár avatta fel 137-ben, amit annál is inkább meg kellett tennie, mert róla nevezték el. Tehát ez azt jelzi számunkra, hogy Murszella alapításához is volt valami köze. Tehát akkor azt látjuk, hogy az északkeleti pannóniai területnek a városiasítása, ami érintett több, tehát tartományterületet érintett, legió területet érintett, és ilyen határokat kellett kijelölni. Tehát ehhez kellettek azok a bizonyos jogi ismeretek, amelyekkel Claudius Maximus rendelkezett, amelyek miatt ő ott volt Aelius Cézár kíséretében. Az Antinous kultusz bevezetéséről már megemlékeztem, tehát Aelius Cézár egészen biztos, hogy Antinous kultuszát megalapította, megtehette, ugye megvolt a trónörökösi rangja, megvolt a kultuszalapításhoz szükséges, Quindecem vir sacris faciundis, 15 férfiú a szent cselekedetek végzésére főpapi méltósága, és hát ugye megvolt a trónörökösi rangja is, illetve hát az impériuma is. A Pannonia Inferiori helytartóságának idejéből Claudius Maximus, ugye az Aelius Cézárral közös tevékenységét követően Pannonia Inferior helytartója lett 141-ig. Egy katonai diploma jelzi Albert falváról, illetve hát ez az előbb bemutatott szoborbázis, és feltételezhetjük a korai időpontokán, amikor ő itt helytartó volt, hogy hát például is a hajógyári szigeten épült helytartói palotának a korai történetébe is befolyással bírt, lévén, hogy ugye itt volt 3 évig helytartó. Az életének a folyása utána egy sajátos fordulatot vett, mert a császár visszahívta Rómába, ahol több méltóságot kapott, többek között ugye konzul is lett belőle. Viszont ami rendkívül fontos, hogy a szent épületek kurátorságát kapta meg Rómába, ami 144-től lehet keltezni. A felső határa az kevésbé bizonyos, de ha azt vesszük figyelembe, hogy Antoninus Pius megrendezte Róma város 900 éves születésnapját 148-ba, akkor rögtön logikussá válik, hogy a kurátor Aedium Sacrarum tisztsége egy ilyenféle bizalmi figurának, mint Claudius Maximus, aki egyébként a Pannonia Limes kiépítésében is részt vett, erről majd írásban lehet részletesebben olvasni. Tehát egy ilyen figurára bízta rá ezt a fontos dolgot, ugye tele volt Róma templomokkal, ez csak illusztráció egyébként, meg különböző szakrális épületekkel, amelyekkel foglalkozni kellett. Ezen kívül ugye 145-ben készült el Hadrianusnak a temploma végül is, a Divus Hadrianusnak a háza, és abban az évben Claudius Maximus Sodalis Augustalis, tehát a császárkultusz Róma városi legfőbb papjává is kinevezték, tehát a kurátorsága ezzel is összefügghetett. Ezt követően visszatért Pannonia Superiorba, ahol megint csak hallgatnak a források, hogy bármiféle jelentős esemény történt volna, 6 évig volt helytartó. Tehát itt meg tudjuk fogalmazni, hogy az a bizonyos történelmi szituáció, amit a Rex Quadis Datus érmek is jeleznek, hogy a szomszédsággal, itt a Dunától északra élő szomszédsággal Róma jó viszonyra törekedett, azt Claudius Maximus 6 esztendőn keresztül fenntartotta. Nincsenek hadi cselekmények ebből az időszakból. Ellenben itt megint csak egy egész különleges feliratállító közeg részéről kapott feliratot, hihetetlen jó fej lehetett. A Carnuntiumi, ugye a Felső Pannonia székhelye, legió összvérhajcsárai és állatgondozói állítottak az üdvéért oltárt. Tehát ilyen feliratállító közeg a lehető legritkább. És Claudius Maximus kapott tőlük az üdvéért egy oltárt, nem csak Aquincumban kapott szoborbázist. Tehát összességében egy varázslatos arc lehetett, egy rendkívüli figura. És végül hát az utolsó fellépése a történelemben Szabratában történt 158-ban, Apuleiusnak a peréről van szó, azt már említettem. Állítólag ez a Triri freskó akár Apuleiust is ábrázolhatná, ezt soha senki nem erősítette meg, viszont ez a Szabratában előkerült szoborbázis felirat nagy valószínűséggel saját magának Apuleiusnak a szobra alatt állt, és itt lehet látni, megmaradt néhány fal és 3 oszlop a szabratai bazilikából, ahol Apuleiusnak a pere zajlott, amely a világtörténelem egyik legérdekesebb pere, ugye talán közismert, hogy azzal vádolták meg Apuleiust, hogy mágia segítségével elcsábított egy gazdag özvegyasszonyt, és feleségül vette a vagyona miatt, állította az özvegyasszonynak a fia. Apuleius pedig nem tagadta, hogy ért a mágiához. Ha rábizonyosul, hogy negatív mágiát tud, sötét dolgokat, akkor az a vesztét jelentette volna. Odaállt a bíróság elé Szabratában, és kérente, igenis én értek a mágiához, de az, amihez én értek, az a szentségek letisztult tudománya, a legtisztább isteni dolgoknak az ismerete. És ezt jó szépen kifejtettem mindenkire való hivatkozással, aki ő előtte valaha is a témában megszólalt, és számított. Plátont, Szokratészt, Plutarkoszt, mindenkit bevont, kortársakat, meg régi szerzőket, és a végén ugye Claudius Maximus felmentette. Nyilván ő is egyetértett Apuleiusszal, hogy a mágiának az ilyen típusú ismerete az a birodalom számára kifejezetten hasznos tulajdonság, úgyhogy Apuleiuszt nem marasztalták el. Itt van egy összefoglaló a Claudius Maximus tisztségeiről és pályafutásáról, ami tulajdonképpen a magyar nyelven most került bemutatásra először így tól-ig, és összefoglalásra, tehát ezeket a tisztségeket töltötte be, egy rendes szenátori pályafutást járt végig, és ugye az utolsó ismert hivatala az Africa Proconsuláris helytartói tisztsége volt, és ezt azt lehet mondani, a szenátori pályafutásnak az tulajdonképpen egy nagyon megbecsült és nagyon magas presztízsű eleme volt Africa Proconsuláris helytartójának lenni. Azt követően eltűnt a forrásokból, és megkockáztatható az előbb említett Marcus Aurelius helyre a 8. könyvében hivatkozással, hogy 160-nál tovább már nem élt. Köszönöm szépen a figyelmet. Thank you for your attention.
Köszönjük szépen ennek az érdekveszítő történetnek, nyomozásnak és kalandos útnak a bemutatását, és szeretném neked is átadni az emléklapot.
Köszönöm szépen. Köszönöm szépen.